Hi everyone. I'm back again to crank out what will undoubtedly be the longest chapter of this, at least so far. Last time I made a point of asking whether I should read Chapter 9 as two parts, the way it's written, or just string them together. And I want to give a shout out to ProfSet548 for saying it should be the latter, so thanks for that. And I hope you and everyone else continues enjoying. Let's do it then. Chapter the 9th. A Father's Lament. The sound of brush being pushed aside and the light whistling of wind told Vinyl she was being dragged through the ever-free forest. She'd been dragged along for a good 2 hours now, and was getting quite annoyed. They'd tied her legs together so she couldn't move. She could hear the two EBI agents talking about some kind of revenge mission. She heard Bane's name once or twice, but she couldn't hear enough of the conversation to piece together anything. They stopped for a moment, and Vinyl heard a hatch or something being opened, and then the air around her got really cold. "Go to Bane's office," she heard a deep voice say. Bane's. She wasn't exactly looking forward to seeing that asshole again. One of the agents carrying her threw her on the floor and uncovered her head. She glared back up at the stallion, her face mirroring her in his sunglasses. "Go inside. The director wants to have a talk with you," he said, pulling Vinyl to her feet. Vinyl mumbled through the gag, and the agent pulled it out of her mouth and untied her binds. "What if I don't want to go in?" she said. "You don't have a choice," he said, pointing to the door behind Vinyl. "Get moving." "Fuck you," Vinyl said, punching him across the face, sending his sunglasses flying across the hallway. The door behind Vinyl opened, and Baines stood in the doorway. Now, Vinyl. No need to get feisty," he said with a smirk, reaching his prosthetic arm out and gripping Vinyl's shoulder. "Now, come inside, and let's have a little chat." He gripped her shoulder tightly, and she turned around and followed him into the room. They were in a small metal-walled chamber, with a small desk in the middle of the room. It was quite dim and very dreary. "Come in, sit down, have some tea. We're all friends here," Baines said, taking a seat behind the desk. On top of the desk sat a familiar-looking blue cloak, caked with bloodstains. It took her a minute, but she recognized it as Trixie's. Baines caught Vinyl eyeing the cloak, and he picked it up. "Oh, this is just a little memento." He looked up at Vinyl. "From my daughter." Vinyl's heart jumped. Trixie was Baines' daughter? "I know the whole story, Vinyl," he said in a monotone voice. "All of it." He stared into Vinyl's eyes with a burning anger like nothing ever before. Vinyl could feel her very soul cringe with fear as Baines moved from behind the desk toward her. She turned to attempt to escape through the door, but it slammed shut and the locking mechanism made a loud clank. "You aren't leaving here until I get my vengeance." Baines growled angrily. His prosthetic arm clutched a large knife. Vinyl ducked just in time to avoid a savage stab from Baines. She felt a stinging sensation from her rib. "Fuck," she thought, realizing that one of her stitches had just popped. This encounter had just turned into a race against time as blood began to leak out of the wound. "There's no way I can fight like this. I need to figure something out and fast," she thought, dodging another furious swipe from Baines. "Just die, damn you!" Baines roared, thrusting the blade forward. He managed to graze Vinyl's shoulder, but even just a slight touch caused Vinyl's arm to bleed profusely. Oh, great. That's exactly what I need. Another source of blood loss. Vinyl glanced quickly down at her bandages, and was glad to see they weren't soaked in blood. Yet. By her calculations, she probably had around 10 to 15 minutes before the blood loss caused her to pass out. First things first, she needed to get out of this room. Baines made a swipe at Vinyl with his hoof, and Vinyl ducked just in time. She made her way to the door slowly, dodging his attacks with each step. Her side began to ache more, and her bandages started to get wet. She positioned herself in front of the door, and smirked. "Come and get it, bitch," she said, gesturing for Baines to attack. Baines growled angrily and took a stab at Vinyl, missing and hitting the door with all his force. The door buckled and collapsed. Vinyl chuckled. "Thanks, asshole!" she yelled, kicking Baines in the chest and running out of the door. Outside the room, the hallway was filled with EBI agents, all of which were staring at Vinyl in surprise. Baines popped his head out of the room. "What are you waiting for, you idiots? Get up!" he shouted angrily as Vinyl slipped around the corner. There were a few agents patrolling the corridor, so she hit one in the face, knocking him out. "Sorry," she said to the unconscious stallion, relieving him of his M1911 and Fayed. Vinyl had just managed to slip the device onto her hoof when a group of agents came galloping around the corner, their own Fayeds locked into position. One of them called her out, and the entire posse began to fire at her, sending bullets ricocheting down the hallway. Vinyl clenched her teeth and ducked around a corner, reaching her arm around the wall and shooting a few shots. Not knowing if she'd hit some pony, she began to sprint down another hallway. They all looked the same, and she had no idea where she was going, but her ribs hurt like hell, and she was running out of stamina. She needed to find the infirmary, if anything. She turned another corner, only to be confronted by another group of armed agents looking for her. "Shit!" she screamed as they opened fire, a bullet grazing her cheek. She turned on hoof and took off down a separate hallway to her left. This entire situation was just insane. She was stuck inside of an underground facility filled with agents armed to the teeth. Then it caught her eye, a bright sign labeled Infirmary Wing. Vinyl thanked Celestia for her luck, and wasted no time entering the room. It was a stark white room, filled with stretchers, medical supplies, and blinding white lights. The whole hospital scene gave Vinyl the chills. She'd rather be at Fluttershy's cottage if she was going to get medical attention, among other reasons. She sifted through the various cabinets and shelves and looked for anything to sew up her wound, and even possibly soothe the pain. She stopped when she saw a small syringe labeled adrenaline. Vinyl contemplated it for a moment, but shoved the syringe aside. She found a small box of medical thread and a few needles. Vinyl unwrapped her wound and discarded the soaked bandages. Using a nearby cloth, she cleaned the wound and dumped some peroxide over it. The white foam dissipated, and she stuffed the needle into her wound. She bit her lip as she sewed the gaping hole together and cleaned around the area. Vinyl grabbed a roll of gauze from the cabinet and wrapped her wound tightly. Hopefully her stitches wouldn't pop again. Vinyl climbed to her feet and was getting ready to shut the cabinet when the syringe of adrenaline caught her eye again. She began to reach for it when the infirmary door opened and an armed agent stood in the doorway. "Fuck!" Vinyl thought, ducking behind a counter. The agent opened fire, nearly hitting Vinyl in the ear. "Just leave me alone, damn you!" she screamed, popping up and carefully landing 3 shots into the agent's gut. She fell to the floor and gargled as blood poured out of the wound. Vinyl sighed and began to exit her cover when she heard a gunshot and her arm went numb. The agent had managed to get a hold of her gun before dying and hit Vinyl in the left arm. Vinyl's arm burned in pain, and she grabbed the adrenaline needle with her Fayed. She took a breath and stabbed the needle into the side of her neck. Instantly, her mind exploded into a euphoric rainbow. Her entire body was tingling in the most magical sensation she had ever felt before. She quickly grabbed the gauze and wrapped the fresh bullet wound. Vinyl attempted to move her arm, and it seemed to function fine. Looking to the dead agent, Vinyl had a brilliant idea. She approached the corpse and relieved her of her equipment. The rest of the EBI was in trouble. Vinyl emerged from the infirmary, a Fayed on each hoof, and armed with 2 M1911s. She grinned at her own genius, and ventured out into the rest of the underground facility. Right off the bat, she spotted a pair of agents looking for her. She took care of them with ease, a bullet to the skull with each of her handguns. Of course, the shooting alerted any nearby agent, and right on cue, a parade of suit-clad opponents came trotting around the corner, firearms raised. Vinyl was surrounded. At least 3 agents were on either side of the hallway. They, of course, thought they had Vinyl cornered and that she'd come easily. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Vinyl lifted each of her fayeds, one pointed at each end of the hallway. She grinned, and began to pump the triggers quickly. 7 rounds flew down each side of the hallway, tearing apart each target they came in contact with. The barrels of each of Vinyl's weapons smoked, and the empty cartridges fell to the floor with a metallic clack. The hallway was beginning to flood with the blood of 8 dead agents, and Vinyl took a deep whiff of the slightly coppery smell of the liquid and breathed out. Her heart was pumping at insane speeds, and she still felt like she could do absolutely anything. She wished Baines was here to fuck with her now. Oh, the things she'd do to that bastard. It seemed Vinyl would get her wish, because at that moment Baines turned the corner, still clenching the huge knife. "Hello, Baines," Vinyl said. Another troop of agents shuffled in behind her, leaving her to face Baines. "Hello, Vinyl," Baines said with an evil smile as he approached Vinyl. Vinyl grinned and raised her weapons. Baines continued to advance. The look in his good eye was absolutely terrifying. Vinyl pulled the triggers on both firearms, which were aimed at Baines' eyes. An empty clicking noise was not what she expected. She clicked the triggers several more times in panic before dropping the empty guns to the floor. "Shit, shit, 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 shit!" Vinyl thought as Baines got closer and closer. Baines was practically right on top of Vinyl now. His breath was hot, and his face was a look of pure insanity. He grabbed Vinyl by the throat with his prosthetic and slammed her into the wall, denting the metal surface. Vinyl grunted in pain and grabbed onto Baines' prosthetic with both of her fayeds. "Is that all you've got?" she croaked. Baines' nostrils flared in anger, and he slammed the unicorn to the floor. Vinyl screeched in pain, and Baines stood over the pony, laughing maniacally. "Before I kill you," he began, "I just want to let you in on a few things." Baines smirked. "Skolda being found in the tunnels in Manhattan wasn't an accident." Vinyl's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to comment, but Baines punched her in the face. "Shush, bitch. It's my turn to talk," he said angrily. "I was the one who sent Skolda into the tunnels for recon, and it was also I who informed Mr. Livestrong of the intruder in the tunnels." Baines finished with a laugh. You fucking corrupt son of a bitch!" Vinyl yelled. She felt something metallic click against the claw of her fayed. She fumbled around before securing the object in the claw. "I'm corrupt!" Baines barked. "I'm corrupt! You're the heartless whore that killed your best friend! You have no space to talk. You should learn when to shut the fuck up!" Baines hollered, punching Vinyl again. No, it wasn't Vinyl that did that. She wasn't in control of it. No, she wouldn't have a two-timing asshole like Baines screw with her head like that. "You're the one who—" Baines stopped as something was shoved into the inside of his cheek. Vinyl had managed to get hold of an M1911 from one of the dead agent's corpses. "No, you should learn when to shut the fuck up," Vinyl said, squeezing the trigger. The side of Baines' mouth exploded, and his cheek was gone. His tongue flailed wildly, and blood sprayed about the hall. In blind rage, Baines grabbed Vinyl by the throat again, and slammed her into the wall once more. He pulled his prosthetic back and hammered Vinyl in the face several times, breaking her jaw, her nose, and several teeth. Baines threw her to the floor again, and stomped on the unicorn's head, causing Vinyl to instantly lose consciousness. Vinyl opened her eyes, only to be staring into the face of a young Ruby Rhubarb. "Ruby?" Vinyl said, her voice a higher pitch than she remembered. "Of course it's me, silly," Ruby said with a giggle. The last thing Vinyl remembered was getting slammed into the floor by Baines. Where was she? Ruby eyed her anxiously, her lime-green eyes wide and cheery. Vinyl stared back up at the green filly, still unsure of what was going on. "So? Why did you tell me to meet you here?" Ruby asked. "I asked you to meet me here?" Vinyl said, confused.
"Of course, silly. You told me to meet you here after school, that you had something important to tell me,"
Ruby said with a smile. Of course. She remembered this. It was the day Vinyl confessed to Ruby that she loved her. Vinyl smiled and sat up. "Well, Ruby, I like you," Vinyl said, her cheeks getting red.
"Well, I like you too, Vinyl. I mean, we are best friends."
Ruby giggled and hugged Vinyl.
No. I mean, I like you. Like you,"
Vinyl said. Ruby pulled away from the hug and stared Vinyl in the eye. There was an awkward silence, and Ruby smiled brightly.
"Well, Vinyl, I like you too."
Ruby giggled and leaned in to kiss the unicorn. "Wake her up," came a strange voice. Suddenly, Vinyl felt a lot of weight around her neck, and the sound of a lever being pulled. A massive shock ran through Vinyl's body, and she howled in pain. Her throat was on fire. She began to convulse into fits. Her hooves were restrained, and she was strapped to a large metal table with a collar around her neck. "That's enough," said the voice again. The electricity stopped, and Vinyl began to cry, breathing shakily. "Oh good, you're awake." Vinyl looked to her left and saw Baines, looking quite gruesome. He had a fake patch of skin sewn over where his cheek had been until recently, and when he talked, you could see the rubber on the fake cheek stretch. It made Vinyl sick to her stomach. "Welcome, Vinyl," Baines said, pacing around the metal table, "to my hobby shop." He laughed, and a light flickered on, revealing a large room full of various sharp tools, strange liquids, and many other torture devices. Baines was way more corrupt than Vinyl thought. She looked down at her chest, and her wound had healed. "Oh, don't worry about that. I had the doctors fix you up," Baines said, watching Vinyl intently. "I didn't want any previous wounds to get in the way of my fun."
"Fuck you, you psycho!"
Vinyl screeched. Baines nodded his head, and a lever clicked. 350,000 volts of electricity blasted out of the collar around her neck and through her body. She had shut her eyes tight and was attempting not to scream. Her eyes watered, and the smell of burning hair from her coat met her nose. Vinyl's body began to spasm erratically, her pelvis jerking in every direction. Baines raised his hoof, and the lever clicked off. Vinyl stopped convulsing, and began to cry loudly. Baines approached the end of the table where Vinyl's head rested, and wiped a tear off her cheek with his good hoof. Now, don't cry, my sweet. This will all be over soon." Baines grinned, and slid his hoof under Vinyl's chin, tickling it slowly. Vinyl jerked her head back in disgust, and Baines turned to look up into a tinted window behind him. Baines took a cloth from a nearby shelf and placed it over Vinyl's head. Vinyl tried to speak, but before she could open her mouth, a gush of water was washed over her face. Each time she tried to gasp for breath, the cloth stopped her, and her lungs began to burn. The water stopped, and the cloth was removed. Baines looked down at Vinyl and chuckled. Vinyl gasped and took a deep breath, but before she had a chance to take another, Baines threw the cloth back over her face, and more water was dumped over her head. The whole process continued for another 10 minutes. Vinyl was hardly able to keep conscious, and her insides were on fire. Baines grinned. "Having fun yet?" he asked, caressing Vinyl's cheek. Vinyl again jerked her head back in disgust. Baines frowned and grabbed a small glass tube off of a shelf. He grabbed Vinyl's bottom jaw, yanked it downwards, and shoved the tube into her throat. Vinyl gagged and attempted to spit it out, but Baines slammed her jaw shut, breaking the glass and cutting the inside of her mouth badly. Baines brought his hoof back and punched Vinyl across the face, sending even more bits of glass around her mouth. Vinyl coughed and spit out the bloody bits of glass. She looked down at the small, red-stained shards, twinkling faintly in the room's dim light. Baines turned back to the window and nodded again. The table began to turn upright, and Baines got to work securing chains on each of Vinyl's hooves. The restraints snapped off, leaving Vinyl suspended by the chains. Baines grinned and flipped a switch on a console, and gears in the ceiling began to spin slowly, stretching Vinyl out. As the twisted machine raised her arms above her head, stretching the muscle and flesh to its painful limit, Vinyl began to feel her arms being pulled from their sockets, and her eyes began to water. Crack. There went her left arm. Snap. The right arm followed. Vinyl groaned in pain, slowly losing consciousness, but Baines wouldn't have that. He grabbed a syringe off the table and jabbed it into Vinyl's side. A shot of adrenaline pumped through her blood, and she shot back awake. Baines began to punch at Vinyl's ribs as if she were a slab of meat hanging there for him to beat. Vinyl didn't feel it, though. She was too busy thinking of a way out of this. With her arms pulled out of their sockets, this wasn't going to be easy. She had minor movement in her legs. She could probably maneuver her way out of the chains. A small hook hanging from the ceiling caught her eye, and she got an idea. Baines was busy sorting through a box of tools, and Vinyl took the opportunity to slowly use what magic she knew of, and the energy she could muster up. She managed to untie one of the chains. She tried again, but was unable to conjure up enough magic to untie the second chain. She looked back to the hook and slowly began to swing herself back and forth, attempting to get the chain caught on the hook. It took a lot of effort, but she managed to get the sharp end of the hook caught in one of the holes in the chain. She twisted her torso around. The chain slowly began to bend to her will, and then finally it snapped. Vinyl fell 3 feet to the floor and winced in pain as her arms flopped helplessly about. She looked over to the computer console and slammed her shoulder against the metal surface, jamming her arm forcefully back into its socket. A shock of pain rumbled up her spine. She muffled a screech and did the same with the other. Luckily, Baines was still so caught up in his box of tools, he hadn't noticed any of this. Vinyl slowly climbed to her feet, and then a loudspeaker crackled on. "Baines!" screamed a voice from the speaker. Baines turned around, an oversized scalpel held in his prosthetic. He glared at Vinyl angrily and dove forward, swiping furiously with the weapon. Vinyl managed to jump out of the way as Baines hit the floor. She stomped on the back of his head and made her way out of the room. Before she even had a chance to look around, Baines came dashing out of the room, blinded by fury. Vinyl looked around and then began to panic. She was in a one-way hallway, and the only way out was blocked by a huge psychotic killing machine. Vinyl couldn't lie. She was afraid. She was more afraid right now than ever before. In fact, she was absolutely sure she was going to die on the spot. Baines reached down and grabbed her by the neck, and brought her right up to his face. Vinyl shut her eyes, and waited for the cold metal of Baines' weapon to sink into her body. But it never happened. She opened her eyes, and was shocked to see Baines crying. "Why," he sobbed, "why won't you just die?" He dropped Vinyl and sank to the floor. Vinyl didn't know what to do as Baines sat there, sobbing and wailing loudly. All I want. My little filly, she's..." Baines wailed loudly, dropping the scalpel to the ground. "I just want my Trixie back." Baines looked up at Vinyl and weakly swung his arm. "Why can't you just..." He laid down on his stomach and began to wail again. Vinyl looked down at Baines, and yet did not feel sorry. She walked over and stood over his back. She lifted her hoof over his head and was prepared to bring it down with all her strength and crush his skull as if she was crushing a bug. But she stopped. The sound of Baines' sorrowful sobbing ignited something deep in her heart, and she felt sorry for him. But the sound of sobbing brought something else back into her mind. The image of Skolder crying and begging for his life came to her mind. And then she remembered how it was Baines' fault that Skolder ended up in that situation in the first place. Her pity turned to hate, and she lifted her hoof back over his head again. "Wallow in hell, you son of a bitch!" she screamed, stomping on the back of his head. His face slammed into the hard metal floor, and the back of his head went concave. Blood shot out of his ears as his skull broke into pieces, and his brain squashed beneath Vinyl's hoof. A disgusting splat met Vinyl's ears, and it sickened her somewhat, but she shook it off. In her mind, Vinyl saw this as karma. She had killed Skolder in cold blood, so she was simply getting vengeance. She looked down at the bloody mess before her and turned away. At the end of the hallway that Baines had been blocking, there was a dimly lit sign reading "Surface Access." Vinyl's luck was changing. Before she had a chance to step away, an EBI agent emerged from the torture chamber, presumably the one that had been operating the controls from the window. He pulled a small firearm out from his suit with his Fayed and shot at Vinyl. Vinyl ducked and snatched up the scalpel in her teeth, lunging forward and sinking the edge of the blade into the agent's heart. He gasped for breath and fell to the floor. Blood spattered across Vinyl's face, seeping into her mouth. She licked her lips, savoring the metallic taste washing across her taste buds. With that, she made her way to the staircase and began the ascent to the surface. Okay, that wasn't as long as I thought it was gonna be, but maybe it was all the more enjoyable for that. I like this one. The whole chapter's just got some of my favorite dark set pieces this story has to offer. I don't like seeing Vinyl tortured, but she took down another major villain there. We're definitely getting down to the wire, only 3 more parts to go. So, stay tuned for those. Love to hear your comments as always. And thanks again for listening, every pony. See you later.